Today in Europe. This is the time of day when the Columbia Broadcasting System calls in its CBS representatives abroad for reports direct from Europe. First this evening, we shall call in Berlin and hear the news from the German capital, where today the news has been that the war will go on. And then later during this broadcast, we'll switch over to London, where today Prime Minister Neville Chamberlain made the speech which refused the German peace terms. But first, Berlin, and we take you now to Berlin.
Good evening. This is Russell Hill in Berlin. The chances of peace have been dropping all evening as inklings of the official German stand to Chamberlain's speech have leaked out of the Wilhelmstrasse. An official communique may be expected at any time now, and entirely reliable sources report that it will finally slam the door on peace, the door that the Nazis left ajar after Daladier's speech Tuesday. The city has been waiting with hardly concealed eagerness for this speech of Chamberlain's. It has not heard the speech, and probably never will. But it will hear what, from a practical point of view, is much more important. It will hear the German reaction. 6 hours ago, it was still possible to hope that the German stand would be that Chamberlain had left room for negotiations. At that time, the men who make decisions in Germany were still closeted, presumably examining the text of the British statesman's declaration to see whether it left any loophole for further diplomatic activity. It now seems that no such loophole was found. It is believed that the official communique, when it is released, will be worded in very strong language indeed. I can qualify this statement in two ways. In the first place, as long as no official German position has been publicly taken, it is impossible to say that it closes the door to peace 100%. All that can be said is that there is every reason to believe the German intention is to do that. In the second place, even though the Germans themselves may have come to a decision, there is just a chance that some powerful neutral may advise a reconsideration. I am thinking of the Soviet Union. If this new ally of Germany's wanted negotiations to take place, it might be able to make its influence felt. But most observers here do not believe this is a serious possibility. It would not be correct to speak as though negotiations had been going on for the last 10 days. There have been no notes handed back and forth, but actually the effect has been the same. The recent speeches on the part of Hitler, Daladier, and Chamberlain have been answers to each other. But they have been important not only for the purpose of testing the possibilities of reaching an agreement, but also for purposes of strengthening what is called here the home front. It is important to convince the population of each country that the government is fighting a just war, that the enemy is 100% wrong. I believe that this has been accomplished with considerable success on either side. The task of demoralizing public opinion in the enemy countries has by the same estimate been correspondingly unsuccessful. This is Russell Hill in Berlin, returning you to Columbia in New York.
And now let's hear the report from London. Go ahead, London.
This is London. I was in the House of Commons this afternoon when Mr. Chamberlain made his reply to Herr Hitler. The House was attentive but undemonstrative. On only one occasion did we hear that low rumble from both sides of the House which is reserved for statements approved by the vast majority of members. That occurred when the Prime Minister said that it would be impossible for Britain to accept such proposals as those set forth in the German Chancellor's speech. I sat in the gallery just about 5 yards from Mr. Maisky, the Soviet ambassador. He arrived ahead of most of the foreign diplomats. He sat down at the far end of one of the reserved benches. A few minutes later, the Duke of Alba, General Franco's representative, arrived and sat at the other end of the bench. About 10 feet of dull, green, polished leather divided the two men. Later, that empty space was filled by other diplomats. Mr. Maisky was smiling, not broadly, but still smiling. When the Prime Minister made his first reference to Russia, nearly every head in the House, members and visitors alike, swiveled round and eyes were brought to bear on the Soviet ambassador. That faint smile was still there. Mr. Maisky has an excellent poker face. 6 or even 3 months ago, Mr. Stalin's representative in London would not have been subjected to such a barrage of questioning eyes. Perhaps that's an indication of the changed position of the Soviet Union in world affairs. When Mr. Chamberlain had finished speaking, I talked with a number of Parliament members in the lobby. In general, his speech had been well received, but those who wanted a clearer definition of war aims still want it. Those who believe that it would be better to have a conference now are still of that opinion. And one or two wonder just what sort of guarantees would be acceptable, whether or not commitments by Russia and Italy would be considered sufficient guarantee that Germany would not again resort to force. There is no question that the overwhelming majority of the House stood behind the Prime Minister in his rejection of the German proposals. Herr Hitler tried to place the blame for continuation of the war on Britain. Mr. Chamberlain says the next move is up to Germany. It is quite possible that today's speech may not have been the last word. The new Italian ambassador, Signor Bastianini, is on his way to London, and certain reports from Rome indicate that he may be bringing with him a document setting forth Italian views concerning peace proposals and an international conference. It is difficult to see how any proposals can bridge the gap between Berlin and London, and I think the opinion of most observers in London tonight is that the world's most unwanted war will go on. Columbia's war correspondent, Bill Henry, sends us a report from the Royal Air Force on the Western Front. The average person, says Mr. Henry, thinks of an airfield as a large space surrounded by imposing hangars, crisscrossed by concrete runways with a large white circle painted in the middle. Fighting airfields are not like that. The one I visited today you could pass on the road, much less in the air, without guessing that it was anything but a big plot of farmland. As a matter of fact, French peasants were actually raising crops on most of it. But if an enemy plane were to buzz over it, the whole neighborhood would suddenly come to life. For here is part of the British Air Force, with crews on duty day and night. I walked across a field, and almost before I knew it, I was walking bang into a huge airplane, magnificently hidden. It was poised, virtually ready for flight. My presence had brought the woods to life. Out of nowhere popped a young blonde chap. Like most British flyers, he looked about 18, but probably he was a trifle more than that. We scrambled under the wing of the big plane, through some bushes, and discovered a young man squatting down by a fire doing a bit of cooking. Behind him was a path running under the trees. We squeezed along into a dugout, perhaps a dozen feet square. There stood another tow-headed lad. He was scraping the youthful down from his pink cheeks. And he laughed when I almost fell through some camouflage bushes into a hole. There a group of young men were sitting around wicked-looking, skyward-pointing guns. And then I said goodbye and walked back toward my car. And that's the end of Bill Henry's report from the Western Front. We have news of the Polish Navy, because tonight in a broadcast here, Monsieur Zaleski, the Minister of Foreign Affairs for Poland, had this to say: units of the small but brave Polish Navy are in action alongside the British fleet. I mentioned to a friend of mine today that this was Columbus Day at home. He smiled and said, if Columbus had arrived in America today, having sailed from almost any port in Europe, I think that he might decide to stay over in the United States. And now for the news from Thomas Grandin in Paris. Go ahead, Paris.
This is Paris. Chamberlain's speech has met with the entire approval of French official quarters. It's felt that the Prime Minister expressed the views of this country as well as those of his own nation. Whereas Daladier gave what might be called a fireside radio talk, Chamberlain has expressed the Franco-British attitude officially from the House of Commons. France agrees that no peace is possible without guarantees and security. The government here, like that of England, is prepared to study proposals, but it felt that the suggestions made to date by Hitler are not worth examination. The military communique mentions ambushes and patrols on both sides, and activity of French advanced units, notably in the region south of Saarbrücken. The center of international interest, obviously, is not on the Western Front this evening, but in the northeast of Europe. The more closely French observers watch this situation evolve, the more convinced they seem to be that Stalin is getting the better of Hitler. The Paris Times puts it this way: Russia, without fighting, merely by means of a diplomatic move based on the Red Army advance toward the west, is getting big advantages and occupying positions that most certainly constitute a threat to Nazi Germany. What's striking, the paper continues, in the mutual assistance treaties concluded by Russia with the Baltic countries is that in every case, without exception, the pacts appear to have been drawn up with this end in view. The fact that Vilno has been ceded to Lithuania is of no importance, according to the Temps, because the latter country is under Soviet domination. As for the Finns, who are a proud and liberty-loving people, the editorial goes on, they know they will get a certain amount of backing, especially from Sweden. Soviet expansion toward Finland raises a real problem for the Scandinavian countries, which are now threatened by both Russian and German imperialism. The North Sea is involved, the Paris Times declares. England, France, Belgium, and Holland, all of which border the North Sea, can hardly remain indifferent to this development, the editorial concludes. Lucien Bourguez, writing under a three-column headline in tomorrow's Petit Parisien, speculates as to whether the Soviet-German agreement includes the Scandinavian area. Very soon, he points out, we shall know. French observers as a whole seem to be convinced that Russia is getting the lion's share, and that history may see Hitler primarily as a man responsible for spreading communism throughout the north, the center, and the south of Europe at this particular time. This is Thomas Grandin, returning you now to the Columbia Broadcasting System in America.
Here in America, we have a dispatch from Moscow which says that in Moscow there's still no official statement of what took place when United States Ambassador Lawrence Steinhardt, acting on the instructions from Secretary of State Cordell Hull, called at the Soviet Commissariat for Foreign Affairs at 2:30 this afternoon, Moscow time, and presented the American viewpoint to the Premier and the Foreign Commissar, Mr. Molotov, whose name means hammer in Russian. Of course, we do know that in Washington it's been revealed that Ambassador Steinhardt told Molotov it was the earnest hope of the United States that nothing would occur which might injure peaceful relations between Russia and Finland. It was announced in Copenhagen that the Danish, Norwegian, and Swedish ministers in Moscow made representations to Russia similar to those of the United States, although, our State Department did say that America was acting unilaterally, acting alone, and not in concert with other nations. But Moscow reports that the Russian capital does not yet know what the American ambassador said. After the Russo-American conversation, Finland's special envoy, former Premier Dr. Juho Paasikivi, was called to the Foreign Affairs Commissariat at 5 o'clock this evening, Russian time, and he remained there for approximately 1 hour. He'll see Molotov again Friday afternoon. Now, just a reminder that at 8:55, Columbia will present its nightly broadcast of Elmer Davis and the news. This is the Columbia Broadcasting System.